Good morning. It's 9 o'clock on the 21st of October. This is the ordinary council meeting for today. I'll call attendance, and we have everyone in attendance, and good morning to you all. I'll then now move to an acknowledgement of country, and Councillor Kunzelman, would you like to do an acknowledgement of country?
Ipswich City Council acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which we are gathered, acknowledging our gratitude that we share this land today, but also acknowledging the cost of that sharing and our hope that we can move to a place of justice and partnership together, and that we welcome opportunities for further engagement.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kunzelman. We're now moving to the opening prayer, and Councillor Ireland, would you like to lead us into prayer?
Thank you, Mayor. Heavenly Father, we grant that we who seek to serve you in the affairs of this council may have wisdom in our deliberations, the guiding of your hand in our works, and the grace to serve together to advance the prosperity of our city. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Councillor Ireland. I have no apologies or leaves of absences. I'll move on to item 5, which is condolences. And I understand that Councillor Fichtner, you'd like to move the condolence motion.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So I'd like to move that Council express its condolences on behalf of the City for the family of Mr George Hogg OAM. We wish to celebrate George's life and his immense contributions to our city's performing arts community. George passed away on the 3rd of October 2021 at the age of 86. George was a musician, choral director, conductor, teacher and singer, winning awards since his first Eisteddfod in 1947. He was a highly accomplished vocalist, having undertaken vocal training at the Queensland Conservatorium and gaining an AMUS and LMUS qualifications in singing. During his acting singing career, George was an ABC recitalist as well as a soloist with the Queensland Symphony Orchestra, the Queensland State and Municipal Choir, and the Australian Army Band Brisbane. George was just 11 years old when he won his first Eisteddfod competition, and it fanned the flames for a lifelong love of performance. He competed continually for 72 years in Queensland, around Australia, and overseas in Wales, the spiritual home of the Eisteddfod. In the Queensland State Eisteddfod, he won a total of 34 championships and 22 Champion of Champions awards, a remarkable achievement. Though his voice changed over the years, his passion never wavered, and he shared that passion generously, mentoring generations of young Ipswich vocalists. Helping them to improve their technique and encouraging them to the best performances that they could possibly give. As one of George's many former students, I can attest to the expertise, dedication and zeal of his teaching, and a few prods along the way. But for George, teaching was more than just about developing the vocal skills of his students. He was a person who strived to make a positive difference in the lives he taught, and he did. George also adjudicated at the Queensland and interstate competitions for many years, passing his knowledge to competitors with a kind word on how they could improve. His legacy as a life member of the Eisteddfod Council of Queensland and a long-term former president will live in the memories of the countless musicians he inspired to reach greatness. George founded our city's iconic Ipswich Orpheus Chorale in 1969, serving as the conductor and musical director for 30 years. He is the first musical director in the history of the Queensland Eisteddfod to lead a choir to win all 8 of the senior choral sections in one competition. He retained an emeritus conducting position within the Queensland Eisteddfod movement, and for several years, until recently, conducted the massed choirs at the opening ceremony each Easter. Ipswich City Council is particularly grateful for George, for his impact and influence as a manager of the Ipswich Civic Hall, as it was known then, where for 20 years he helped develop the facility into the city's premier cultural destination. Throughout these years, George cultivated local talent and promoted live music performance in Ipswich. In tribute to his achievements, the auditorium at the Ipswich Civic Centre is named after him, as is the Ipswich Orpheus Chorale's headquarters at East Ipswich. In 1984, George was announced as Ipswich's Australian Day Citizen of the Year for his service to the musical community. In 1992, he was awarded the Medal of the Order of Australia for service to music. George once said of singing, "It's an emotional experience to perform, and that feeling of performing on stage and singing, it never leaves you. Your voice may deteriorate over the years, but the feeling it gives you never changes." On behalf of this city, I pass on my sincere condolences to George's wife, Jocelyn, and their children and grandchildren. We are forever grateful for the time and passion he invested in Ipswich. His contribution to musical performance and culture in our city is unparalleled. He was a one in a million. While George will be well and truly missed by his family and friends and by those he sang and played with, those who learnt from him, and those who just appreciated his performances, his indelible legacy and achievements surrounded us. His indelible legacy and achievements surround us, and they will continue to enrich us. Veil the great George Hogg OAM. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fechner. I note that you move that condolence motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous and carried. Thank you so very much, Councillor Fechner. We move on to item 6, which are the tributes. And a tribute is a statement or an act or a gift honouring someone or something, intending to show gratitude. I understand Councillor Ireland would like to do a tribute.
Thank you, Mayor. On Sunday, I went to a come and try scouting day out at Ripley, at Eco Ripley, and in accordance with their rules, they give a scarf to supporters. They hope to support all of the councillors here, or get support from all of the councillors here in due course. I believe that Councillor Tully and the Mayor also have a supporters scarf. They aren't trying to take away the numbers from existing, scouting clubs, but what they're trying to do is, because Ripley is a growing area, they're trying to bring more facilities for the use of the area to our area. So I don't know how the drive went on Sunday, but I certainly wish them success and hope that they're able to set up a scouting den out in the Ripley Valley. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ireland. Yes, I believe their numbers are quite large at Raceview, and they're looking to open up another group around the area. So,
yes. Yeah. Well, hopefully it doesn't take away from one den to make the other. So, but and I heard that they did a drive at Springfield the week before, and they actually got 9 adult volunteers. So that was a really good outcome for them at Springfield.
I think one of them did say they'll be setting up a group there as well.
Yes. So thank you very much to the scouting movement.
Thank you. So I guess it's a tribute. Those in favour, let's raise your hand. Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. Thank you. We move on to item 7, the presentation of petitions. There are none. Item 8, presentations and deputations. There are none. 9, public participation. There is none. So we'll now move on to number 10, item 10, which is the declaration of interest on matters on the agenda. Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Madsen.
In accordance with Section 150 EQ of the Local Government Act 2009, I, Councillor Jacob Madsen, inform the meeting that I have a declarable conflict of interest in item 14.6, Ipswich Central Redevelopment Committee meeting report. The nature of the declarable conflict of interest is I'm on the executive of the Ipswich Trades Hall and Labor Day Committee, and our building, the Ipswich Trades Hall, is adjacent to this Ipswich City Central Redevelopment works. As a result of my conflict of interest, I will leave the meeting room while the matter is discussed and voted on.
Thank you very much, Councillor Madsen. Councillor Fechner.
Thank you. In accordance with Section 150 EQ of the Local Government Act of 2009, I, Councillor Andrew Fechner, inform the meeting that I have a declarable conflict of interest in item number 14.6, entitled Ipswich Central Redevelopment Committee's Report. The nature of the declarable conflict of interest are my business interests in both A1A Events Proprietary Limited and Bar Heisenberg Proprietary Limited, located in the top of town. As a result of my conflict, I will leave the meeting room while the matter is considered and voted on.
Thank you, Councillor Fechner. Thank you both councillors for declaring those conflicts of interest and ensuring that they are managed appropriately. Are there any other declarations of interest? No? We'll move on to item 11, which is the confirmation of the minutes. So I move that the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 16th of September 2021 be confirmed. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Milligan. I'll open them up for discussion. There being no discussion, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous and carried. Thank you. Item 12 is a mayoral minute. There is none. So we'll move on to item 13, which is business outstanding, and there is none. So now we move on to item 14, which is the reception and consideration of committee reports. And item 14.1 is the Growth Infrastructure Waste Committee. So I move that that the minutes of the Growth Infrastructure and Waste Committee of 9 of 2021 of the 7th of October 2021 be noted, as it's a meeting that has full delegations. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Kunzelman. I open the matter up for any discussion. There being no discussion, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That's unanimous and carried. Thank you. Move on to item 14.2, and I'll hand over to the chair of that committee to see if he would like to move that and make any comments.
I'd just like to move it. It's as is, just a couple of standard procurement matters. Refer to the reports from last week's committee meeting.
Okay, thank you. Were there any questions on any of the Governance and Transparency Committee matters? No, in that case, I move that Council adopt the recommendations of that meeting of the 7th of October 2021. Is it okay if I have you, would you like to second that, Councillor Madsen?
I believe I already moved it.
Oh, you moved it? In that case, I will second it. Any comments or questions? Discussion? No, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. We now move on to item 14.3, which is the Community Culture, Arts and Sports Committee. I'll hand over to the chair of that to see if they'd like to move that report and make any...
I just want to open it up by moving that Council adopt the recommendations of the committee of a couple of weeks ago. It's probably worth noting that one of the biggest front-facing policies that this council will adopt in the customer experience strategy was discussed. The committee was very happy with it. But yeah, I just wanted to particularly note that that's very important. I mean, we're talking about the way that our residents engage with Ipswich City Council, and the trajectory that this strategy will take it on will make it far easier for the community to engage with us. On top of that, we're proposing, if accepted by the full council here, to adopt the Active Ipswich strategy, of which Councillor Johnick and I were both nominated to be part of the Healthy Ipswich Alliance as part of that strategy. So we're very excited to see what community outcomes we can drive through that particular alliance. I think it's discussed at committee last week that this was the missing piece in terms of how sustainable we are as a city, what infrastructure are we building as a city, but how do we involve the community and bring them on the journey? And I think that this is a really great policy to tie all that in. How do we get our people moving? How do we show that as a local government we are very concerned about the health and well-being of our residents? So a couple of really awesome strategies that are very front-facing and involve the community in such big ways. So I want to first of all thank the council for their contributions to the customer experience strategy. I know that we did workshop those at length, and it was on Councillor Ireland went so far as to propose a notice of motion so that we could see some tangible improvements. So over the next 12 months we'll be watching that one closely. So that's the wrap up. and I'd like to move all of those recommendations in batch.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fichtner. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'll open up for any discussion. I guess for myself, the only thing I'd like to point out with that item, with the draft customer experience strategy, I'm reading from the Community Guide to Local Government in Queensland. I'm just finding the right part here. It talks about council service requests, and I'm going to quote, this is from the Queensland Government here, and it talks about the public putting in and the residents putting in service requests, that if you want to request that your council provide or improve a service, what to do. And in particular, I think it's really important to say, to make a service request, you should contact the council's call centre or hotline, email address or inquiry counter. This ensures that council can prioritise the request efficiently and organise for council officers to complete it. If you contact a councillor, they may refer your request to the usual council hotline, email or council officer. It is the councillor's role to focus on strategic decision-making for the whole council area rather than managing day-to-day service requests, which are the responsibility of the council CEO and other council officers. And in particular, it states it is illegal for a councillor to contact a council employee to direct them to complete your work request. So I think it's really great to see this strategy to make sure that for our organisation to continue to improve, to provide better services for our residents. Thank you. Any other comment or discussion? No? In that case, I put that motion. I'll read it out because I don't think it was read out. That Council adopt the recommendations of the Community, Culture, Arts and Sports Committee of the 7th of October, which was moved by Councillor Fichtner, moved by the Deputy Mayor. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. We'll now move on to item 14.4, which is the Economic and Industry Development Committee, and I'll hand over to the chair of that to see if you'd like to move that and make any comments.
Thank you, Chair. So I would just like to move the recommendations of that committee, and I just would like to add the one item there that wasn't the minutes from the prior committee was for council to receive and note the Small Business Education Program report, and the fact that it has been well received by our small business community, and it's been run in conjunction with the chambers and the facilitators of those education programs were highly skilled, and most were local as well. So I've heard great feedback from the chambers and from small businesses alike. So well done to our AcDev team.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Is there a seconder for the report? Thank you, Councillor Ireland. Any discussion? I think I just concur with yourself, Deputy Mayor. It's the feedback we've had from the business community has been great, so thank you very much for that. If there's no other comment, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. We now move on to item 14.5, which is the Environment and Sustainability Committee. I'll hand over to the chair of that for him to move it and discuss.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to move that Council adopt the recommendations of the Environment and Sustainability Committee meeting number 9 of 2021.
Okay. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Kunzman. Any discussion or commentary? No, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous and carried. We now move on to item 14.6. So I'll wait for the two councillors to leave. Thank you very much. So item 14.6 is the Ipswich Central Redevelopment Committee, and I'll hand over to the chair of that committee to move that motion.
I propose that we move all items in batch.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Ireland, thank you. Any discussion? There being no discussion, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous and carried. Thank you very much. I'll now wait for the two councillors to come back to the room before we commence. Thank you. We now move on to item 15, which are the officers' reports, and 15.1 is the CEO's organisational performance report for September 2021. I will move that. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Fechner. Any discussion or questions of the CEO on the report? No, just that I think it's a great report. I think it's a great summary of significant things that are happening, and I think it's a really good record. It goes into quite a bit of detail into the organisation, which I think is good for us as councillors, but also good for the residents as well. Thank you. In that case, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. We now move on to 15.2, which is the monthly financial performance report. Does anyone have any questions of the relevant council officer? I do. If I ask the CFO to come to the lectern.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor, councillors. Jeff Keats, Chief Financial Officer.
Thank you. Mr Keats, do you mind highlighting the key achievements as well as probably the key risks that we need to be aware of?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. As you've got there in front of you, the results for really the first quarter of the financial year. I guess as an overall summary, certainly from an operating position, which is positive, we're in front of budget as it stands overall. And I guess highlighting the key points in that, that's primarily being driven by some additional revenues in the spaces of some fees and charges in the town planning space, as well as some operating grants, and just also in relation to some further costs and some further revenues. From a costing perspective, I guess we're basically on budget, very close, a couple $100,000 over. And again, just from a risk perspective, Mayor, highlighting there's a couple of movements in there. Employee costs are slightly over budget. I've highlighted in the report there's a couple of one-off expenses that have been incurred in that first quarter, driving that. And we're also obviously monitoring, which we've discussed before, around annual leave. We phased some of that into September, and as I've noted in the report, 1 week of the September fell into October, so expect some of that to be clawed back a little bit in the October period. And obviously in materials and services, probably the big ticket item there is it's slightly over budget, but again, referred to in the risk section, being heavily driven by our legal costs associated with our waste. That's currently over budget, about $800,000 to $1 million. And that's primarily why the materials and services is over budget by a couple $100,000 overall. So that's obviously, and that's again referred to in the risk section as mentioned. From a capital side of things, overall we are slightly behind budget. Pleasingly, IED is on target and has spent right up to their budget for the first quarter. The delay is in relation to the retail of the Nicholas Street precinct, which councillors would be aware of, and is a phasing issue more than it is of what's likely to be underspent by year end at this point in time. And so, yeah, the major risk items, Mayor, is obviously, we incurred a lot of legal costs at the moment for the first quarter. Is that going to continue further on, or is that now the cost for the year? That'll be the major risk to keep an eye on, and we continue to work with the executive team around management of leave across the organisation, both from a mental health side of things, but also in terms of busyness and also keeping leave on track.
Mr Keats, if I touch on the budget for staffing.
Yes.
How is council going to be managing that? Obviously, we're over budget. Is it as well as FTE? Are we over FTE as well?
No, we're not over on FTEs. As you're aware, we include a 5% vacancy rate. We believe we're reasonably on track for at the moment. The key drivers in our analysis to date is around, as I say, the one-off payments that have occurred, both some catch-up on some workers' comp, which is always adjustment after year-end, and some other one-off terminations. And the other side is just our analysis of leave. As I say, some of our phasing of the leave, we expect a little bit more to be taken in September than what was actually taken, and some of that has fallen into the first 2 weeks of October. So we'll continue to work with the executive team in terms of monitoring vacancies, our FTE numbers, but we're not over on FTEs. It's just a number of components that is making up that. And it's probably a watching brief would be my view at this point in time versus anything of any major concern.
Okay. In regards to the legal expenses for waste development, we've just seen that unfortunately the Wanless are appealing the decision of this council and the residents of Ipswich.
Yep.
Does that mean we'll have to have another budget amendment to accommodate?
Correct.
I'm guessing it's going to cost over $1 million for an appeal.
Yes, that's something we'll need to consider in a budget amendment. We've obviously spent the budget year to date on the cases that have arrived. And I guess part of that discussion with councillors will be to see, as part of our overall budget and overall materials and services, can it be absorbed within that? Or do we need to, which is unlikely, so do we need to come back to council and effectively request for additional funding in the whole budget as part of one of the amendments, which will probably happen at the half year once we get an indication of what those costs are likely to be. So
we could potentially having to stop things in our capital works program of maintaining roads and looking after things to fund or out of operating?
We'll certainly have to look at priorities, or otherwise we've got to look to see, do we have enough sufficient working capital to fund that? You know, we've got a current budgeted deficit. We are a little bit ahead on revenue, as I say, at the moment. So if that revenue trend continues, can that be used and allocated? You know, certainly it'll be in the operating side of things, so we wouldn't necessarily have to stop capital projects per se, but we may have to look at how we fund those. And also then, yes, are there any other priorities across the operating budget that we'd need to consider? But again, we would look at all the items in relation to our current ongoing revenue side of things, and also can we manage any other efficiencies across the organisation before we stop side of things.
Thank you, Mr Keach. Does anyone else have any other questions? Yes, Councillor Doyle.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr Keach, just in relation to the finance work with the Nicholas Street precinct team, I understand Queensland Treasury Corp are in there have been working with you. Can you speak to that, please, and just to help us understand the level of assistance they've been providing? Yeah, sure. Queensland Treasury Corporation have been great. They've been fantastic working off with us on a couple of projects, as you say, Councillor Dorr, one in relation to the Nicholas Street precinct, and really looking at as we move forward primarily in the retail side of things. You know, a lot of the civic assets are now built, this building, Tolmer Place, etc., and they're working with us around the decisions in relation to as that becomes available and leased up. What's our strategy in relation to the lease of those, the rent, the holding of those? Do we ultimately sell? And looking at what might be the ultimate value of those retail assets. So they're providing with us some options and discussions in relation to the strategies that council might want to consider in relation to those retail assets as they move forward now into construction phase and then ultimately leasing phase. Yeah, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's important to highlight that they're not here advising us on borrowings, which is traditionally has been their core role, and certainly the relationship they've had with council in the past. This is about providing an extra level of financial due diligence, providing us with their analysts have been immersed in our business. Is that correct? Yes, their analysts have been working closely with the Nicholas Street precinct and keeping us involved through the process. You're right, there's different sections of Queensland Treasury Corporation. This isn't their borrowings or credit review team. We work with them separately in relation to our borrowings programs and our long-term financial forecast. This is their advisory component of QTC, which is supporting us, as you say, through those discussions. You know, the retail precinct of this is unique for council, and it's different, you know what I mean? It's not something that all councils ultimately normally do. So their advice and expertise is very welcome to advise both us as officers and then ultimately to yourselves in terms of decisions we make going forward. They've been a great help to us. Okay, and continuing to work with us as we speak.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions of Mr Keach? No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your report. So I move that the report on council's financial performance for the period ending 30th of September 2021 be considered and noted by council. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Fechner. I'll open it for any discussion or comments. There being none, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. Move on to very exciting report. 15.3 is the adoption of Ipswich City Council's annual report 2020-2021. Would anyone like to ask a council officer any questions on the annual report that has been, I guess, been distributed to us for some time? No, in that case, I will move that the Ipswich City Council Annual Report 2020-2021 as detailed in Attachment 1 be adopted. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Milligan. I'll open up for any discussion or questions. None. I guess the only comment I will make is that apart from being, I think, a very easy to read document, as much as annual reports can be, appreciate the layout, but also we've added an additional transparency measure in there. We've also listed the total remuneration package for the CEO in there. Under the Local Government Act, we only need to put in a $1,000 band, but we've now put their actual total remuneration package in there as well, as a new transparency measure. I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. We now move on to item 15.4. And there are 3 items in this, and it's regarding the disaster management policy review. And I think this probably went on from the chair of the Environment and Sustainability Committee. And if it's okay, do you wish to move this particular one, or move all 3 recommendations together, Councillor Milligan?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I'll move all 3 together.
Would anyone like to ask a council officer any questions on those 3 recommendations or the report? No? Okay, so Councillor Milligan has moved it. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Kunzelman. I'll open up for discussion or commentary. Yes, Councillor Kunzelman?
Thank you, Chair.
Mike.
As the Deputy Chair of the Local Disaster Management Group and Chair of the Local Recovery and Resilience Group, I support this policy. And we speak today at the beginning of the start of what we affectionately call the season. We continue to refine and improve our response to disaster. Our intention is the best possible prevention, preparedness, response and recovery. We continue to work closely with our other agencies. It is also our intention, and this is really important, to promote confidence among residents in our disaster response. However, I also make the point that residents themselves need to think about disaster and plan for disaster. A complex and devastating personal situation is relieved by some thinking about it beforehand, including considering the situation of family and neighbours. Council's website has plenty of ideas on how individuals might respond before an event so that they make the best possible decisions in time of stress. We also have a role here for councillors on whom we will depend to support residents and provide intelligence. It is also important for residents to consider how, if unaffected, they may volunteer to help others. These matters can make a significant difference to disaster outcome.
Thank you, Councillor Kunzelman. Any other commentary? Councillor Milligan?
Thank you, Mayor. I acknowledge the methodology of responding to the notice of motion and thank managers and officers for their work there. In that it was from observations and feedback from the community received following the Rosewood and Carolee wind event and the flooding events in March 2021, and that just in general that it does align with Council's culture of continuous improvement, and as well another analysis undertaken by an independent entity. So that combined, I think I am very satisfied with the response from the branch.
Agreed, and in particular the disaster event support and community policy was, I think, an important addition to that. Any other comments, discussion? No, I'll put the matter to the vote. So put all as moved, those 3 recommendations together. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you, it's unanimous and carried. We now move on to a late report that was sent out to us at 1 p.m. yesterday. So before we do any moving, I'll ask for the relevant council officer to come to speak to that report. Please state your name and position.
Good morning, Carly Gregory, Marketing and Promotions Manager.
Ms Gregory, thank you very much for this opportunity. Do you mind outlining the opportunity, the cost, the scope, but also why it's come as a late report as well, just for good governance?
So firstly, apologies that it has come as a late report. It only came across our desk as an opportunity late last week. So we acknowledge that you haven't had potentially adequate time to consider this opportunity. But given the state of events and event attraction and how difficult it's been in the last 2 years due to COVID, we thought it was an important opportunity to bring to the city. So this is an opportunity to host a friendly A-League game in our city at North Ipswich Reserve between Brisbane Roar and the Adelaide United teams. This is a normal part of their pre-season preparation, but these events are usually held interstate in Victoria and New South Wales often. So coming to Ipswich is a great opportunity. They're requesting a sponsorship support of around $25,000. Obviously, bringing a game to a city like this costs more than that. They are simply requesting that we cover their costs, which is really about the accommodation and flights and transporting of obviously Brisbane Roar to North Ipswich Reserve. We know that participation in football is very strong locally. For some context, there were 3,000 attendees at the local Western Pride Grand Final recently, so we know that there's strong support for this in the city. It has been nearly 5 years since the Roar have played in Ipswich, so we certainly have missed out in that sense. And I think the real opportunity here, other than profiling of the sport, is the Western Pride have the opportunity to manage the bar and the canteen at this. So there's significant revenue opportunity involved, as well as activating during and before the game.
Ms Gregory, is this within the budget of the events, city events budget?
It is within the city events budget, and given that some events that were planned to come to the city and endorsed are not, we certainly have the scope for this. It is important to note, though, that we have assessed this opportunity like we assess all. It is low on the ROI scale. Yep. Most of that is because it's such a short turnaround time. So normally we would work 3 months out and obviously build in that benefit. But I still think, given the capacity that we think 5,000 to 6,000 people attending, and in lieu of other events that have not come to the city, that it's still a great opportunity.
Right. And I know in council, in a previous meeting, I'm very keen to have Western Pride involved. It's great that they're running the canteen. But I guess at half-time or in between matches, will they be given the opportunity to run something themselves?
Correct. I think that's... planning's in the works, you know, if this is endorsed. So they will activate it, whether that's through juniors, those kind of, you know, activations that they normally have at half-time. But my understanding is that they'll still have presence pre and post the game. So they're working with that right now.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of Ms Gregory? Yes, Councillor Kunzelman.
Thank you. Is the waiving of the reserve venue hire fee included in the $25,000?
It is not.
So that's an additional?
Correct.
Which is worth what?
I can clarify that and come back to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Apologies that I don't have that at the moment.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Ireland.
It's not a question so much, Mayor. I'd just like to acknowledge the support from Pat Boyle from Western Pride. We couldn't have made the contacts with Adelaide without him, so I think that rather than saying we've done it all, that we need to share the praise. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Ireland. Any questions? Okay, thank you very much, Ms Gregory. So I'd like to move, the recommendation is that Council support hosting an A-League friendly football match between Brisbane Roar and Adelaide United teams, including 1, a sponsorship funding envelope of $25,000, 2, waiving of the North Ipswich Reserve venue hire fee, and 3, support of event through Council's marketing channels. Do I have a seconder for that? Yes, thank you, Councillor Fechner. I'll now open up for discussion and commentary. No, I'd just like to reiterate Councillor Ireland and the fact that we are very fortunate that Pat Boyle is a constant advocate for football out here as well. If there's no other discussion, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. Thank you. Move on to item 16, which is the notices of motion. Thank you, Councillor Ireland.
I would like to raise a notice of motion regarding the agritourism in Ipswich City. My request is for a report to be presented to the Growth Infrastructure and Waste Committee no later than March 2022, outlining the short-term and interim options that can be implemented to assist the agritourism industry in Ipswich prior to the adoption of the new Ipswich planning scheme.
Thank you, Councillor Fechner. Oh, sorry, Councillor Ireland. I apologise for that.
Turned on.
And I'm just making sure have you read the current paper that's going around council on agritourism? You've read it? You've read this? Wonderful. Lovely. Thank you. Any other notices of motion? No? I'll move on to questions on notice. And there are none. I'll then move on to closing the meeting, and it's 9:41. Thank you very much.